Hi, third grade. Well, in Bible and History, we have just studied the life and death of Jesus right at this time of Easter, which also coincides with a Jewish holiday called Passover. And so on our timeline, we've actually arrived at a very important and unfortunately very sad event in Jewish history, and that is the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So this is not long after the death of Christ that this takes place. So if we were in class, we'd have this card on the wall, and some of you recognize what this is. This is called a menorah, and I'm going to read the back, and then we'll talk a little bit about some Jewish holidays, what the menorah is, and then we'll talk a little bit about some activities I sent for you to do. All right, so let's read about the destruction of Jerusalem. In 70 AD, the Jews finally rebelled against Roman rule. They said they would not obey Rome or pay her money. The emperor Vespasian sent his son Titus with an army to put an end to the rebellion. The Jews crowded into the city. They fought during the day and struggled to rebuild the walls of the city at night. Eventually, the Romans broke through the walls, and the Jews went to defend the temple. The soldiers burned the temple. The remaining Jews were killed or sold into slavery. To celebrate their victory, the Romans built an arch in the Roman Forum, showing Titus and his army leaving the city of Jerusalem with the sacred menorah, the famous 7-branched candlestick. Many believe this event is what John wrote about in the book of Revelation and what Jesus predicted would happen to the disobedient Jewish race. All right, so I'm actually going to show you. I wish I had a color picture, and you are welcome to research with your parents. You could find a color picture of this because this arch still stands. It's called the Arch of Titus in Rome, and I'm going to show you a black and white picture from the book Streams of Civilization that I've been reading to you sometimes. So there is a picture of the Arch of Titus in Rome. So if you go to Rome today, you can see this. In fact, this is one of their government buildings in the background that now has a museum that I remember touring one of the times that I was in Rome, this building right here. So you can go find this arch if you go to Rome. It's called the Arch of Titus. And this is actually a close-up of, you can see men carrying this big menorah out of the city of Jerusalem once the Roman Empire had defeated it. So I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about just the Jewish people as a whole. They celebrate a lot of holidays to this day that that you would be familiar with, but may not really fully understand. So a couple of things about Jewish people of today is that they are a great people of remembrance. So their holidays all have significance in remembering stories from the past. Remember, the Old Testament is part of the Jewish tradition, right? Because what separates us today as Christians from the Jews of today is that we believe that Jesus is the Messiah that God sent. But unless you're a Messianic Jew or one that believes in the Messiah Jesus, if you're a Jew today, you believe that Jesus was a teacher but not the Messiah. They still believe that the Savior has not come. And so, but they hold to the New Testament teachings of Moses and the Ten Commandments, and then they have other books of law as well that fall in line with the history of the Jewish culture. So if you remember, you've learned in chapel the Shema last year. I believe you were all learning that. And when I thought of what verse I wanted to share with you before talking about Jewish holidays, a verse in Deuteronomy that is kind of our family verse came to mind for me. And then I read it and I remembered, oh yeah, this is the Shema. They'll know this. When I read this, this will be very familiar. So I'm going to read you this verse from Deuteronomy 4:6 through 8. And the book of Deuteronomy is a book of, it's reminding the Jews of the law. It wasn't the first time they had learned the law. It has a lot of the law in it, but it's not where God brought the law first to his people. It's where he reminded them of the law, and they were reminded of their wandering in the desert and some of the mistakes that they had made. And so remember, the Jewish people, Jesus came to make us all his and to save everyone, but the Jewish people are God's special chosen people that were given the covenant before any other Gentiles, we call them, or they used to be called, and we still refer to them sometimes. When we read the Bible, we hear the word Gentile and we understand that it means non-Jew. So we would be considered, if we're not of Jewish descent, we would be considered a Gentile. And so now we're under the covenant too, the new covenant with Christ. But remember, the Jewish people, even today, had that original covenant with God. And we've seen throughout history that the Jewish people, sometimes they are doing what God wants them to, and sometimes they're not. And I think that can sound very familiar if we self-reflect a little bit on that about our own life. So I'm going to read you Deuteronomy 6:4-8. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. So hopefully that was a very familiar verse to you. But I read that to you because I wanted to remind you that the Jewish people are a people of remembrance. So I want you to think about that as I talk really quickly with you about 2 Jewish holidays. I gave you a couple of activities for Hanukkah. So I wanted to show you a menorah that people would use today for Hanukkah. Today, the menorah looks a little different. They actually have 4 on each side. And I believe on the last day they light this candle in the middle. But the original menorah, like you saw on the Arch of Titus, had 7. Because the story of Hanukkah, I'll read it because I think a little bit of it's on here, but every day the oil lasted. It was during a battle and they had to have light from a lamp. And they only had enough oil for one day, but God kept doing a miracle, and every day they had more light, or they had enough light to last until the 8th day when they were able to get more oil. And so the 8 lights on the menorah represent while they waited. So that would be why they have those 8 lights on the side today. So I'm going to read this to you. Hanukkah is the Jewish festival of lights. It starts on the 25th day of the Jewish calendar, which is usually around December. The festival lasts for 8 days and involves an 8-branch candlestick called a Hanukkah menorah. The Hanukkah is lit every night, or the menorah is lit every night, and here they call it the Hanukkah. So I guess that's what they would call their Hanukkah menorah. Hanukkah is lit every night, and special blessings are said. 1 candle is lit on the first night, 2 on the second night, and so on until all 8 candles burn. So they don't light 2 the second night. They light 1 the first night, and then the second night they would light another one, so they'd have 2 candles burning, and so on, and they would just keep adding to that. This reminds the Jews of the miracle in which the menorah in the Temple of Jerusalem, the sacred city of the Jews, kept burning for 8 days when there was only enough oil for 1. During Hanukkah, it is the tradition for children to receive small presents each night. So they get a little gift each night. It's kind of like when we're celebrating Christmas, around that time is usually when Jewish children are celebrating Hanukkah, and they're getting a gift every night of Hanukkah. All right, one more holiday. Before we start talking about Hanukkah, though, I want to just show you and remind you. So the Star of David is one of the most recognizable symbols of the Jewish people to this day in the Jewish nation. So I included that in your little printout that has a dreidel, and you have the Star of David, and then you have the modern Israeli flag that you can color as well. That flag that you're going to color, you can color it any color you want. It is white and blue. Today, and you can look that up online with your parents, or you can just do whatever color you would like. But just so you know, that flag today is just white and blue. All right, this is a dreidel. I wish I could find, in Albuquerque where we used to live, there is a large Jewish population. And so we had many Jewish friends there, and one of Charlie's Jewish friends gave him a real dreidel one year. And I asked him to find it, and I forgot to check back with him to see if he had found it. So this is the dreidel you've received this week to make. And I wanted to let you know, Will helped me make this. It made better with tape. Even though it says glue, I had better luck getting it to stick together with tape. And still, look, it's a little concaved here. So even better, if your mom and dad or your whoever's doing homeschool with you has some cardstock, that would be better, but it works on regular paper because I printed mine on regular paper and I'm still able to make it work. So I will I sent instructions to your parents on how to play the dreidel game, but the reason I wanted Charlie's was because it had the actual Jewish symbol on each side. And I meant to bring you a picture and forgot, so I'm just going to tell you. On each side of a real dreidel, there's the Jewish letter for all of these words. Nothing, half. Let's see, can you see that? Put in, and all is what this says. Okay, and so then you would play this with someone in your house. You might play it with Easter candy because they usually play it with candy, and you spin the dreidel, and then see mine landed on put in. So I would have to put some candy into the middle. And then my partner would take a turn and they would spin and land it on put in again. But let's say it landed on half. They would have to put in half their candy. And then so on and so forth. The game ends when it's kind of a cutthroat game because the game ends when someone has all the candy. But you can play multiple rounds. So I would suggest if you're going to play it with candy, play it with something small like M&Ms. Or you could play it with marbles or beads if you don't want to really play for candy. But I just wanted to show you an example of the dreidel that you can make this week if you'd like. And this one is from the Jewish holiday Hanukkah. All right, one more holiday I wanted to talk about is called Passover. And that is when Jesus came into Jerusalem that we just learned about the week of his crucifixion. He was coming into town during Passover. So the Jewish holiday of Passover is, it lasts for 8 days and 8 nights. And on the first 2 nights, a special meal called the Seder is held. And so I wanted to show you what this looks like. They would sit around. And remember how I talked about how the Jewish people were a people of remembrance? Well, during the Seder, they would sit around and they would talk about the story of Moses leading the Jewish people from Egypt. And so if you have the Prince of Egypt movie, that is a great depiction of that story of of Moses leading the Jewish people out of captivity in Egypt. And that would be a great way to remember that story and to watch that. So we let our kids watch that the week of Passover leading up to Easter. Symbolic food is served at that Seder meal, and they're featured on a little special plate. So I wanted to show you. Matzah bread is one of the most important that's served there, and it's a cracker-like bread that's not, it's flat bread. It hasn't risen like bread does with yeast, like maybe you made resurrection rolls, or maybe your mom has made some other kind of bread during the break and it rises and it gets real fluffy. Well, matzah bread, and unfortunately mine didn't print the second page, so the matzah is right there. And you can see that it just looks, here's the Seder plate of all the different foods, and I'll tell you what those are real quick. But that matzah cracker in the corner, it's basically just a cracker. So it's a flat, because the story goes that they left, when the Jews were granted their freedom and they left Egypt, they were in such a hurry that there was no time for the bread to rise. And so that's why they use unleavened bread is what it's called, or matzah. All right, so they have horseradish on this plate, a roasted egg, this is the shank bone, and then they have applesauce, and then they have a horseradish, did I already say that? A green vegetable, and parsley on the plate. And all of these are symbolize part of, just like the matzah bread has a symbol, they all have symbols. They all symbolize something to the Jewish people. So I didn't send it in this one, but I may send you, I sent your parents a lot to print, and I'm trying to cut down on that. But there's a really cool, so you can also go with your parents and you can research a Seder plate online. There's lots of kid-friendly websites that show you what each item represents, and in color you can see what this plate looks like when they eat their Passover meal. All right, well, hopefully you guys are having a great week, and I'll see you next time.